Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV, bringing you all another Market Watch episode. So with everyone eagerly waiting for the ban list, it feels like the Yu-Gi-Oh market has been unusually quiet recently. Sure, we did have a small bit of movement caused by things like the Ice Barrier structure deck and the upcoming archetypes in Ancient Guardians, but for now, everyone's focus is on what changes are coming up with the new ban list, because that's going to have a huge influence on what decks people choose to pick up and play for the next couple of months. Of course, part of that excitement also includes people speculating about what cards could potentially be coming off the list. Not only can these cards spice up the game itself, but they can often have a ton of influence on the market as well, sparking multiple buyouts at a time. So today we're going to take a look at some of the cards that everyone's eyes seem to be on as we wait for the upcoming March 2021 ban list. Let's get started. First up, let's talk about Electromites. So I think that people were talking about this card on the previous list as well, but there are a ton of Pendulum players out there that really want Electromite to come off the list. This card is basically what made any sort of Pendulum deck viable, as it allows you to load any Pendulum monster from your deck to the extra deck so that you can summon it out soon after, while also potentially allowing you to draw a card. It is a huge boost to the consistency of a lot of Pendulum decks, but I feel like it was banned because of how it simplified basically every single Pendulum strategy just into an Electromite turbo deck. However, without Electromite, Pendulums really haven't done anything for the last couple of formats, but with the Do-Re-Mi chord archetype coming out in Ancient Guardians, some people believe that Electromite could come back as generic Pendulum support to help make the new archetype more competitive. Now, as a result, we've seen Electromite trend upwards over the last little while, where original secret rares are $20 for the unlimiteds and $25 for the first eds, and even the Megaton reprints are around the $15 mark, even though the card did fall down to around $5 pretty soon after it was banned. Now, I don't know if this card is going to be coming back for sure, but between the upcoming Do-Re-Mi chord archetype, the Metal Foes support that we just got in Blazing Vortex, as well as the potential for a Pendulum strategy to get support in Ghosts from the Past, there might just be enough relevant Pendulum cards coming into the game that Konami may decide that they want to bring Electromite back. Now overall, this isn't a card that I would go out of my way to grab at its current market price, but if you can grab a copy for anywhere from the $5 to $10 range, I think that that is a reasonable gamble for you to take. Next up is a pretty interesting one. We have Called by the Grave. So I think that when everyone saw that Called by the Grave was limited previously, everyone immediately thought and assumed the same thing. We're going to be getting Crossout Designator released here in the TCG sometime soon. Well, obviously that didn't happen, and we still don't know when or if it will happen. It definitely could be in Ghosts from the Past, or it could be in the next core set as a sort of import, but we don't have any sort of confirmation yet. However, I think that in the absence of Called by the Grave from the game, people have realized that it's just kind of a necessary evil that we have to have available. Hand traps are obviously an incredibly important aspect of how the game is played today, and Called by the Grave just feels like it's necessary to play against decks that just load up on a ton of hand traps and make it impossible for you to play anything. Sure, we've seen some crazy combo heavy decks in the game every now and then, but if you're getting hit by 3 hand traps on turn 0 and then you just can't do anything, then proceed to get OTK'd, that's not really that fun. Of course, you could say the same thing about playing against unbreakable boards, but we do have cards like Dark Ruler No More and Forbidden Droplets for that side of the equation as well. Now, all of that being said, I think a lot of people, including myself, think it would be perfectly reasonable for Called by the Grave to come back to 2 or 3, if not on this ban list, then in any of the next several, and as a result, Called by the Grave is still a relatively expensive card, despite being limited to 1. It's the secret rares from the 2019 Megatons that are considered the highest rarity and are the most expensive at $7 to $8 a piece, but all other rarities, including the commons and gold rares from Maximum Gold, are actually around $2 to $3 still. If you don't have your copies of this card already, I actually think that this is a card that you should make sure that you own a few copies of, because it does have such a high chance of coming off the list, and it's so impactful, it will probably shoot up in price when it does. I wouldn't be going crazy on this, but if you can get the commons and rares for maybe $1 or 50 cents, or you can grab the ultras for maybe $1 or $2, I think that they are a reasonably safe investment for you to make. Okay, so now we're on to some that are maybe a little bit less realistic in terms of whether or not they'll be unbanned. We have Blaster and Tidal, 2 of the Dragon Rulers that could be coming back to 1. So obviously, ever since Tempest was unbanned, everyone thinks it's possible that we could see the rest of the Dragon Rulers gradually peeled off of the list. I think that the only one that would be really broken if it came back into the game would be Redox, which is why it's not shown here, and also it hasn't really spiked up in price. I think you could argue that Blaster and Title will basically have zero impact on the game at all, so it's most likely that they are the ones that Konami would allow to return. Now, the idea here is that if LP were to get banned, which is a move that a lot of people have been calling for the last couple of lists, you could throw Dragon Link an extra toy in Blaster or Title. They don't even play Tempest now, right, as is, but maybe with 2 Dragon Rulers back, as well as the armed dragon stuff from Blazing Vortex, we could see Dragon Link evolve and play an entirely new way. Obviously, Dragon Ruler format was a really iconic one, so when people look at these cards and think of how broken they were back then and how they could potentially really heavily influence the game if they were to come back, a lot of people flock to them and want to try to pick up these cards just in case. Now, as a result, we currently have Secret Rare Blasters up at $8 and Secret Rare Titles up at $6. I don't know about you guys, but personally, I don't really see either of these cards coming back now. Even if they do hit LP, I don't think that there's a reason for Konami to bring back either of these cards to the game, so we will probably see these cards fall back down to around $3 right after the ban list comes out, as people's expectations settle back down. Now, even if they were unbanned, I think that we could also see something like what happened with Tempest's reprint in Mystic Fighters, where the unbanned card gets a reprint shortly after to help keep the prices somewhat reasonable. Next up is one that hasn't been receiving as much attention as some of the other cards. We have That Grass Looks Greener. So before, we saw this card limited to 1 and then banned, and it was weird because I feel like no one really questioned it when it happened. It was one of those cards that was amazing if you could open with it, because if you were playing with a 60 card deck and your opponent just had 40, you could mill 20 cards right away, which was pretty crazy in a deck like Infernoids. However, if you didn't see it or you were playing a mirror match, you were probably struggling just a little bit. I guess it was a bit too broken of a card for Konami to allow to exist in the game here. However, the card has actually never been banned over in the OCG. It was at 3 for the longest time, then put to 2 in October of 2018, but hasn't really done anything format defining since, and has stayed at 2 ever since then, which is kind of interesting. Now, that does lead us to wonder if there is a chance that we could see Grass back in the game over here, since it's still legal over in the OCG. The card just has 1 printing from back in Raging Tempest, and you are looking at having to pay $15 to $20 for a single copy of the card, which is a lot for something that is banned. Now, for me, I would love to see this card back in the game. I think that seeing some of those Saki 60 card decks in the game would be really interesting and provide us with a little bit more diversity, just because right now we are seeing so many deck lists all just being built virtually the same way. I think it's unlikely that it will happen because it basically is just one of those pretty sacky blowout auto win kind of cards, but because of its semi-limited status over in the OCG, you can't really write this card off as never coming back to the game here. Alright, so this is one that's kind of interesting to look at. We have Thunder Dragon Colossus. There are a ton of people that want this card back in the game. I guess primarily people that were playing the game back when Thunder Dragons were still a deck, and they are remembering fondly how easy it was to bring this card up as your boss monster. There was definitely a good reason for this card to be banned, with how easy it was to throw out multiples onto the field and its ability to prevent your opponent from searching, in addition to its built-in protection effects. Now, I think there were a lot of people arguing that this card could have gone to 1 and everything would have been okay, but then other people argued that with the release of Nemesis Corridor, this card just became too splashable and abusable. Ultimately, Colossus was just straight up banned here in the TCG. However, there are still a lot of people who think that Colossus could come back to 1 and be just fine, and they are probably right. I don't think it's realistic that people are going to be playing a large enough Thunder Dragon engine with other things for Colossus to be very abusable, since they probably aren't going to be providing too much value outside of being able to put up Colossus or Titan. Honestly, if Colossus did come back to 1, it wouldn't be the end of the world. People would freak out for a bit, and then it would probably see a small amount of use, but ultimately wouldn't do anything too game-breaking. Despite this, I don't think it's going to be coming off the list for quite some time. I think that at some point in the future, Konami might want to release some sort of Thunder Dragon or just generic Thunder support, and then they might decide to release Colossus, but in terms of upcoming product, it just really doesn't make sense to unban it now. Now, in terms of price, Ulti Colossus is still way up there at $57 a piece. The secret rares are about $10 and the ultra rares are still about $3, so somewhat significant prices for a card that has been banned for over a year and realistically isn't coming back into the game anytime soon. However, just like that grass looks greener, Colossus is still legal over in the OCG, so it coming back to the game is always a possibility, something that fans of Colossus are going to constantly be hoping for, which is going to keep the price of Colossus somewhat steady. So guys, really briefly, let's take a look at Performapal Monkeyboard. So I find it interesting that people are talking about Monkeyboard coming off the ban list at all, just because it was part of that emergency ban list that we saw back in Performapal format. Monkeyboard was released in Breakers of Shadow, which came out halfway through January, and by February 8th, the card was limited to 1 along with Skullcrabat Joker and Luster Pendulum, along with the banning of Plushfire, Damage Juggler, and Ptolemaeus, which was kinda crazy. That was a ridiculous emergency ban list that we had. We've basically never had Monkeyboard at 3 here in the TCG, and it was already a pretty broken card at 1 because it is just a 1-card pendulum scale, searching for the other scale right when you activate it. Now, to be fair, pendulums have really underperformed recently, not really doing anything at all the last couple of formats, so I guess it does make sense that people are looking for some pendulum cards to take off the list in order to give pendulums a bit of a boost, but I don't think that Monkeyboard is the card that you guys should be looking at. I think that because the card was limited so soon after its release, people don't realize just how crazy the card is, and even though it might be okay if you put this card to 1, I would count on this card staying banned for quite some time. Now, some crazy people are looking around at the OTS tournament pack super rare versions of this card, which are now up at the $5 mark a piece, which I think is kind of silly, though admittedly, the card is really adorable. I think that if you can find someone who's crazy enough, who thinks that this card is going to be coming off the list, and you can sell them copies of this card for $5 to $6 a piece, I would go ahead and do it, offload your extra copies. Otherwise, I guess you could grab a few commons for like 25 cents or something like that just in case, but I wouldn't count on this card coming back into the format anytime soon. Alright guys, the final card that we're going to talk about here is none other than Sky Striker Mobilize Engage. So it feels like not too long ago that everyone was complaining about how sick they were of Sky Strikers, and we had to go through like hits to Kagari, Hornet Drones, Multi-Roll, Widow Anchor, before we were finally able to just ban Engage and really get Sky Strikers out of the game. Now, for whatever reason, we do have people saying that Engage should come back to 1, and honestly, I don't know why people are so excited about the very slight possibility of that happening. Sky Strikers as a deck were ridiculous, but they were also really strong as an engine, synergizing well and seeing play alongside a ton of other different strategies. And it was all possible due to the consistency that Engage provided. So obviously, there were some people that really loved Sky Strikers and played it a lot, but I just don't see Engage coming back to the game anytime soon. I could maybe see it happening a few years from now when Sky Strikers are just a very old memory and Konami releases some sort of legacy support for the deck, but it's definitely too soon for anything like that to happen now. I think that most people know that this card isn't going to see the light of day anytime soon though, so its prices are still somewhat reasonable, though admittedly it's still a bit high for a card that is currently banned and probably not going to come off anytime soon. We have the original Dark Saviors secret rares at about $8 each, the Battles of Legends secret rare reprints at around $5s, and then the Ultra Megatin reprints at about $4 a piece. Now, to be honest, if you guys are holding this card, hoping that it gets unbanned and it will therefore skyrocket in price, you are going to be waiting for an extremely long time. It might see some occasional hype as we get closer to a ban list release and people kind of get their hopes up, but don't expect it to actually get unbanned anytime soon. Alright guys, that is it for today's Market Watch episode. I know we are all really excited for that ban list, which should drop sometime soon. Maybe it'll drop when I post this video, though I guess it is better than it coming out on the day of my ban list prediction. Nonetheless guys, it is important to keep these ban cards in mind, because we do see a lot of patterns every ban list season regarding cards that might come off the list and certain things spiking in price, so we can kind of keep track, right? We can buy them after the ban list is released and some of that hype kind of cools down, and then you pick them up and sell them closer to the ban list and you just ride that wave up. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's episode, please make sure that you hit that thumbs up button for me and let me know. Also, make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what other cards you guys think are fluctuating around on the market, or what you guys think about the cards that we covered in today's video. Also, if you haven't already, make sure that you hit that subscribe button for all of the latest and greatest content from both Tombox and myself here on the channel. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.